hard to see through the lights here. Okay, very good, very good. There's a microphone right behind you.
Okay, so on a daily basis, if you're having a conversation, say even a debate about some of these issues, and the word socialism is mentioned, sometimes it's as though a sort of brick has fallen on the conversation, and there's no way to return it to its form. It's sort of indistinguishable. What would you suggest on a daily argumental basis you would do to restore this conversation to its form?
I'm not sure if I ought to reveal the identity of the questioner, but he's my younger son, Nicholas. And that kind of conversation happens with terrifying regularity at our dinner table. Okay, look. Firstly, you have the great good fortune and the cultural disadvantage of being born American. The brick does not fall in quite the same way in Denmark, but it does fall all the same. And the answer to your question comes in two parts. The first is that we cannot get away from the fact that we have lived through a century in which the word socialism was both pejoratively and enthusiastically identified with political systems which turned out to be, or could be seen to have been from the beginning, both economically inefficient, politically repressive, and culturally sterile. We can't deny that. There's no point in pretending otherwise. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was, after all, by its own account, socialist. Most communist states described themselves in various ways for various purposes, constitutionally and so on, as socialist. I don't think there's much point defending the word. What we have to do is rather different, and that is shift the conversation from abstractions to substance. I'm not interested, even if I were to live another 20 years, in trying to promote some abstraction called socialism. If I'm going to promote abstractions, I'd rather promote justice or fairness. I'd rather promote equality. I would promote equality, by the way, not because this could get you off a hook on your socialist conversation, not because of a belief in the desirability of sameness, but because inequality advances many things that we do not like. Inequality advances poverty. Inequality advances ill health. Inequality advances shortness of life expectancy, poverty, ignorance, and many abstractions, which even in your brick-laden conversation, you'll have no trouble defending the undesirability of. We don't want inequality. We don't want injustice for many similar reasons. We don't want unfairness. And what I think can be reasonably well demonstrated is that a system which rests upon respect, admiration for wealth, respect, admiration for the acquisition of possessions and goods, advantage, privilege over persons who doesn't necessarily therefore become disadvantaged, unprivileged, with lack of access to necessities. That system cannot meet our desire, our intuitive desire for justice, for equality, for an end to unfairness, and so on. And that is why we need something other than what we have. Does not mean we need or want socialism. We don't have to resort to the isms of the 19th century in order to justify 21st century social purposes, social ambitions. But you do need to be much more willing than we are to say what is wrong with the way we currently live. That gets you off the hook of defending something which is not the alternative to what we currently do. There are many alternatives to what we currently do. Don't be on the defensive. Go on the attack. Ask if socialism is so very undesirable, what exactly is it that's so very desirable about a system in which over the last 20 years we have produced an outcome whereby the chief executives of the top 200 companies in this country earn approximately 365 times the average wage of their employees, when 30 years ago they earned about 45 times that amount. Something has gone wrong, that it's not the absence of socialism. I hope that helps.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Professor Judt. I really appreciated the comments. You've opened up some big questions. But I do have to respectfully disagree, right? Sure. Because social democracy is not all that we have. We do have communism. We have a different synthesis of communism. And in that context, I would invite the audience and you to check out Raymond Lotta's talk on October 26th at the Cantor Film Festival. Everything you know about you've been told about communism is wrong, capitalism is a failure, and revolution is the solution. And it puts forth in Bob Avakian's new synthesis of communism, which builds on Mao's ruptures with Stalin and goes beyond, right? But a big part of it is the reason this has been ruled off the map is there are a lot of lies, slander, and disinformation about communism and the past experiences.
We need a question, please.
I really unite with your sentiments about torture, that the discussion isn't about whether it works or not works, right? But the point is that is it possible to talk about social democracy?
We do need a question.
Is it possible to talk about social democracy and these states' prosperity in Europe and the United States without talking about slavery, colonialism, and imperialism?
Thank you. Tony?
I will concede readily that it's extremely difficult to talk about the prosperity, the advantages, the success, the privileges of the social democratic capitalist states of the Atlantic, the Northwest Europe. I'm not asking for a response, if you will concede that it's not possible to talk about communism without reference to the Gulag.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Let me ask a devil's advocate question here. So you pointed out that social democratic countries with a high level of solidarity basically work in small, middle-class, white countries, which are ethnically not so diverse, which is kind of my observation as well. So do we have to choose between being ethnically diverse and multicultural on the one side, or having a society which depends on solidarity? So is that a contrast? Or would it work otherwise?
Lady, if I knew the answer, I'd be in Brussels, running the joint. Look, I wasn't joking. Okay, I was joking, but I was only half joking on the subject of cross-country skiers. It is true that historically, most of the successful solidarist experiments that have endured across generations and across classes have been in countries with few outsiders, few minorities, not necessarily rich countries. Scandinavia was not rich in the 1930s and 40s. Austria certainly not. But the problem of the minorities is a real one, but it should be understood politically and not culturally. The problem in, for example, Denmark, to take one case, or the Netherlands, is that the decline of the social democratic consensus is actively accelerated by politicians taking advantage of the presence of a visible minority, whether religiously visible or different color or linguistically different, to advance a local agenda. The irony is that very often that's an agenda that we would recognize as more or less social democratic. The great irony in Holland, for example, is that the most anti-Moroccan, anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic sentiments come from a party or two parties which advance what they call Dutchism, the belief that there is a native Dutch culture of tolerance, solidarity, mutuality, etc., which sounds an awful lot to our ear like social democracy, but which, of course, doesn't include these people from the outside who are thought not to share it. The task we face, in other words, is to redescribe social solidarity in languages which don't correspond so closely to the language of ethnic solidarism, the language of us versus them, the language of protecting us against the danger that they pose to our utopia, so to speak. That suggests to me that it's not impossible, that it's a political choice. There's nothing about Denmark today or the Netherlands which makes social policies of the kind they've practiced for 30, 40 years, public health policies, policies of social solidarity, policies of income transfer and so on. Nothing about their changed cultural mix that makes those technically impossible. They're rendered difficult by the uses to which cultural difference is put politically. So I see that as a political challenge, not some sort of structural impossibility.
You think it's doable?
I think it's doable, yes.
Because, even in the United States, it's easier to get an Irishman to give money to Ireland than to his fellow black neighbor.
You surprise me.
No, that's actually the case.
Okay. Do you want one more?
Yeah, sure.
One final question.